This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Budget and Performance Committee. Can I ask everyone please to make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions? And can I now ask our clerk, Hannah Barlow, if any apologies have been received?
Apologies have been received from the Assemblymember Desai, the Chairman and Assemblymember Polanski, for whom Assemblymember Best and Assemblymember Garbett are substituting.
Thank you. And can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Assemblymember Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. There may be some discussion regarding the Royal Parks Police. I'm a trustee of the Royal Parks.
Thank you. Noted. And can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of November to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. And can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions from its previous meetings? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the response from the Mayor of London to its letter on the 2023-24 GLA Group Budget outturn as attached at Appendix 1? Thank you. Now we move on to the main item of business, a discussion focusing on the 25-26 GLA Group Budget on the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. I'd like to welcome our panel of guests. We have Kaya Comer-Schwartz, who is the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. Welcome. It's your first time at Budget Committee as well. Later, we will have Lib Peck, where we have some questions on the Violence Reduction Unit. Amana Hamayan, who is the Chief Finance Officer and Director of Corporate Services for MOPAC. Welcome. Dan Worsley, who is the Chief Finance Officer for the Metropolitan Police Service, and Adrian Scott, who is the Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer for the Metropolitan Police Service as well. Welcome on this cold January morning, and Happy New Year to all of you as well. So the first question is from myself, and it's for you, Dan. Last year, the MOPAC 24-25 draft budget submission included 2 different submissions. Was it a challenge this year to be limited to a single budget option or submission this year?
Thank you. No, quite the opposite. So I joined the Met in the early summer. And between Adrian's teams and my teams, we've been working since then to plan for this budget round. So we hit all the requirements from MOPAC and the GLA to submit, and then colleagues from MOPAC to publish the budget. And that went through significant governance and review within the Met in order to get to a position where the Met felt it had a budget that was balanced, that aligned to our strategic priorities, that aligned to kind of where we wanted to get to on performance, as well as the crime profile for London. And we were really pleased to be in a position to submit that on deadline to MOPAC in, forgive me, I forget some of the dates, but in mid-November before we went through the process. So hopefully there is one version of the truth that's the current budget that we have worked on now for a number of months with colleagues from MOPAC to submit the budget that's now out of consultation. So rather than 2 versions being helpful in the prior financial year, I think a single version for the next financial year is much more helpful in terms of understanding the risk and the opportunities within the budget, so that we're ahead of the game in planning for delivery from the 1st of April.
Okay, and Adrian, were you involved in last year's process for the 2 submissions, and how do you feel from your perspective?
Good morning. I was involved, but I had only been in the Met for couple of months when last year's process was running, so I had nothing hugely to add to it or experience to gain from it. But I do agree the process, both internally and with MOPAC, has been much more measured and thoughtful and considered this year than it was last year.
Okay, and based on your feedback, would you expect to see a double submission in future years? Are you ruling it out based on your experiences this year?
Based on my experience, I'd never rule anything out, but I think our intent is to always run a process to have a single budget where MOPAC and the Met and the GLA are aligned. Because what we want to do is best use our resources to deliver for the people of London, and I think a process that delivers that is the best thing. with an eye on the spending review, and then beyond that, you never quite know what the funding scenario will be, and I could envisage future scenarios where you need to run multiple versions. The best thing to do, and the usual thing to do, is have a single version budget that you take out to consultation.
Thank you. The Commissioner has placed a lot of importance on the New Met for London plan, which is a major pillar of his work and proposals to reform the Met. What extent of any unfunded New Met for London initiatives are not included in the balanced 25 to 26 budget? Dan?
So what we've just delivered is a budget for a single financial year in line with the spending review that Treasury and Home Office have run. New Met for London goes beyond that. And so as an executive team and as a Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner, we're committed to reform and all the elements set out in New Met for London. Adrian has all the details on what's in the programme. What this budget has done is reprofile some of that, and so there will be elements that we deliver towards the back end of the next financial year and into future financial years, but there are no unfunded elements for the 25-26 programme, but the profile and the sequencing of that has changed because of the funding envelope that we've got. I don't know that Adrian wants to add anything.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we were very clear it would be a challenging financial year, 25-26, and therefore, as a transformation portfolio delivering New Met for London, we were very keen to undertake a sort of sequencing and prioritisation exercise. There were a couple of big capital projects that we deprioritised as part of that work. So that, for example, is the Firearms Centre in Gravesend and a Physical Leadership Academy, which we deprioritised as part of a financial choice. We spent some time looking at how we could deliver most effectively and efficiently change programmes in the Met. So we, for example, merged together a group of 4 previous programmes into one new programme, which is clearly a more efficient way of doing it and actually has allowed us to create a good capability and capacity to deliver frontline transformation, which is clearly the big transformation of the services for London. So that's a priority. The sequencing then looked at how we would sequence across the delivery of a portfolio of the size that we have. And as Dan says, some of those decisions would have moved to the right in terms of financial years. There is clearly a lot more work to be done in terms of delivery of some of the challenges that will come as a result of the budget pressures that we will be under in 25-26. So there's clearly a new prioritisation and plan that will be required as part of that process too. So there's quite a lot of planning work being done. There's been quite a lot of work in terms of sequencing, but our commitment to reform as an executive team remains absolutely aligned with New Met for London delivery.
And when you say deprioritise, are you, in essence, parking those projects for future years and holding out for positive comprehensive spending review? And,
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly right.
Just on the budget, so how does it align with the 10th of December Commissioner's report to the London Policing Board that stated that the MPS has a budget gap for 25-26 of £450 million? Obviously, there's been a few announcements since then, but how does this align with that comment? Dan?
So going into the budget, if I took myself back to early September, going into the budgeting round, if I looked at the difference between our requirement and the funding that we presumed would be available, there was a shortfall of 450 million. And so that is the budget gap that we started with in terms of planning the 25-26 financial year. What we've done through the budget round is close that gap through a series of different measures, and I'm happy to go into more detail if that's helpful. When the Commissioner spoke, we were still finalising the budget, and MOPAC and GLA were about to go out to consultation on the draft budget. The draft budget that has gone out for consultation closes that gap through a number of measures, and so there is currently no unfunded pressure in the budget that you've got before you. Okay. I'll pause there and go into more detail if that's what
we'll go into detail later on. We've got plenty of questions which will go into the detail from other Assembly members, but helpful to know, so that £450 million gap in terms of proposals now has been closed as a result of measures made and funding that's come in.
It has. I shouldn't say that's not without risk, that's not without impact, and you'd expect me to say that, but financially, the level of spend that the Met anticipates the next financial year matches the funding available.
Okay. I'll move on now to Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair. Dan, the 25-26 budget has been described in the submission as a real terms cut. However, if you separate out the Met from MOPAC, MOPAC's budget has increased substantially, consistently above inflation since 2016. So is it actually quite unhelpful for Londoners and for the Assembly to conflate the two?
In terms of my statutory role as I'll call it a Section 151, which is a kind of standard local government term. It's slightly different in London. My responsibility is to make sure that the Met is using its resources well and that we're funded on a sustainable basis. And what the Met has done through the budget process is been really clear on, with the Deputy Mayor and MOPAC colleagues, the context in which the Met will operate in 25-26, the risks and the opportunities that exist, and therefore the funding that we need in order to meet that demand. The Met has submitted a standalone budget to MOPAC that really is clear on the Met as an organisation led by the Commissioner. I don't think I'll comment on whether it's unhelpful or helpful, because I might pass to MOPAC colleagues, but the Met as an independent organisation, as a service delivery organisation, has submitted to MOPAC the budget that we need, and we've worked through that well and collaboratively, and we're really proud of where we've got to. At that point, I pass over to Amana or perhaps the Deputy Mayor, because how then the budget goes out for consultation kind of starts to speak to the London legislation and the GLA functional bodies.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My personal view is that it's not unhelpful, because the way that the document is set out, it allows you to differentiate the costs, the income, the expenditure, the funding routes in and out for both the force and the Commissioner. And of course, we've got the VRU budget included as well. So that's a personal view. I suspect others will have a different view.
No, thank you. And I don't think the implication at all was that, you know, we weren't aware of the facts. Obviously, the fact I've asked the question, there is the distinction between the two. So I appreciate you both for answering. So given, I think, Dan, you've highlighted in through some of Assemblymember Harani's questions. So given the quite serious funding concerns that the Commissioner has raised around the Met, but not around MOPAC, would it have not been prudent to reallocate some of MOPAC's funding to the Met? So I appreciate you can answer half of that question, but I'm happy if the Deputy Mayor wants to pick up on some of that.
Thank you. I think it's really important to understand that, you know, the Met's budget and the VRU's budget and MOPAC's budget, moreover, come as a whole package. But also to understand that the whole package is a whole package of safety for London. So, you know, what the Met does in, you know, its full gamut of work, from neighbourhood policing to counter-terrorism, is important, but, you know, is one strand of the Mayor's work to protect London and the government's work to protect the country. What we do in the Mayor's office, of Police and Crime, is alongside that. So we obviously invest in key areas like violence against women and girls, exploitation, you know, all kinds of violence reduction, improvement to the criminal justice system. So I don't think it's helpful to conflate the whole thing, because we're looking at the Mayor's priorities around safety as outlined in the new Police and Crime Plan that's out for consultation at the moment, as well as, you know, under that umbrella, what the MPS do. So I don't think you're not comparing like for like, and also you've got different priorities of the different organisations, and so it's not right to balance the two.
Sorry, firstly, do you prefer Claire or Madam Deputy Mayor? Which would you prefer?
Madam Deputy Mayor.
Madam Deputy Mayor,
Thank
very
you.
good. So Madam Deputy Mayor, I think the point of the questioning is that the Met is very much more, I think, in Londoners' eyes, frontline than MOPAC. So therefore, I don't need nodding heads around. I'm just asking a question. So, given that, and some of the strains that we have already been felt, and I think I'm not going to preempt some of the questioning we've got coming later. But, you know, given the frontline issues that we're having with the Met, surely that there has been a disproportionate level of increase in funding for MOPAC, whereas the same has not been reflected in the Met. So therefore, for Londoners' perception and of feeling safe, some of that money could have been passed around.
I mean, it's hard to comment on perception, but I would counter with, I think if you're the victim of rape and you are accessing services through our gateway service that we commission, or you're a young person dependent on their youth worker and mentor, that those are frontline vital services in the work that we're doing to prevent and keep people safe. So that's what that's what I'm saying is, it's a whole picture of how we keep London safe. Obviously, the work that the Metropolitan Police do day in and day out to keep London safe and pursue crime and prevent crime in itself is important, but I don't think it should be a hierarchy of, preventative work.
I just wanted to come in to just to add to the Deputy Mayor's response. As she's rightly outlined, we have a number of statutory functions within MOPAC that we must deliver, but over the last few years, we have absorbed a number of pressures on behalf of the Met in excess of 5 million. So I can give you numerous examples. MOPAC this financial year has assumed responsibility for Appropriate Adults, the Appropriate Adult Service, Pan-London. So that's to make sure when vulnerable people arrive in custody and don't have access to an appropriate adult, that service is available. That's demand-led. It's entirely funded by MOPAC now. Another example are the SARCs, also called the Havens Service, which is Sexual Assault Referral Centres. They were funded by the Met, but transferred over to MOPAC a number of years ago. The growth in cost for that service is now entirely absorbed by the MOPAC budget without any funding from the Met. Equally, when the provisional grant is received from the Home Office every year, and if there's any inflation associated with it, the only element that comes to MOPAC is a discrete component for staff costs. The majority of any inflation goes into the Met and not into MOPAC. So there's lots of examples like that I could provide to show where MOPAC is absorbing as many pressures as it can to allow maximum funding to go over to the Met.
So, Amana, based on that response, and unless I've misinterpreted, are you implying that the significant increases that we've seen in 2016 for MOPAC are solely or predominantly as a result of you taking on further responsibilities from the Met?
Either from the Met or an expansion of MOPAC and VRU services, and an expansion in responsibility. For example, things like DASA, the Domestic Abuse and Safer Accommodation Service, which is a new responsibility, the Serious Violence Duty, that's a new statutory responsibility for the VRU. So yes, it's those sorts of discrete increases.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm just going to go back to Dan and just a question about the specific government grants. So why is the level of specific government grants no longer disclosed in your objective budget presentation?
I suspect, but I don't know, so I may take that away and write back, is because of the timing this year. So when we submitted our budget to MOPAC, I don't think the government had yet set the date for the provisional police settlement, and I think that was set after we submitted. And so I suspect it was as a result of the timing this year and the sequencing of the spending review. I don't know historically whether the Met have always included that in their submission to MOPAC, and I don't know historically what MOPAC has tended to publish for consultation. but the timing was unusual this year because of the spending review and the announcement on the provisional police settlement, and how that interacted with the statutory process that the GLA is required to follow in terms of consultation. But I'm happy to kind of take the question away and write back, because I don't have a detailed response on that.
Sure, that's fine. Happy for you to write back as well. I'm going to move on to Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Deputy Mayor, to what extent does the 2025-26 budget incorporate the Mayor's 2024 manifesto commitments? And what was the additional cost of these commitments in 25-26?
In the design of the budget, obviously the manifesto pledges that are embedded in the previous police and crime plan and the current police and crime plan that's out for consultation were fully considered in the design of the budget. Obviously, as said previously by Dan, some of that was based on, forecasting, what we were hoping, what we were assuming to get. Obviously, we know, and has been mentioned often previously, that there was significant pressure on this budget. We've been able to work with the Mayor's Office and government to increase that budget, which has gone some of the way to enable us to keep on moving forward with those priorities. We're working through that currently together to see how that all falls. But we are hoping to continue to, make sure that we have enough funding to deliver on the current plan.
So I can be quite happy that everything that was mentioned in the Mayor's manifesto, and there's quite a considerable amount to do with policing, that is all going to be funded. You're confirming that to me?
I wouldn't want to confirm that completely to you as of yet, because, as I said, we've got the National Police Settlement and the NIC money, and we hadn't got that when the draft budget came out. So we're working through those priorities. Obviously, as had been mentioned previously at your own committee and this committee, that there's significant pressure on this budget like nothing before. So we are. I think it would be reckless of me to give that promise, because I want to make sure that through the settlement work that we're doing currently and working through those proposals, that we are on a trajectory to be able to do that.
Well, when will you be able to tell us that the things that the Mayor promised in order to get himself elected, when will you be able to tell me that the money is in the budget to make sure that that happens?
Well, hopefully when those proposals are confirmed. Obviously we have to go back to the Home Office as well to make sure that...
Okay, when approximately?
I think by the financial year? By March.
By March, excellent. I'm sure we'll have a conversation about that. And is there money within that to look at these rape gangs? Because when we see what's going on all over the country, there can be absolutely no question that we must have these sort of issues in London. So how much money has been put aside for rape gangs in London?
Well, I know through the work that the Police and Crime Committee have done for a long time now, that violence against women and girls has been a key priority.
Exactly,
of the work.
Which is why I'm asking this question.
I can get you the exact figures of how much funding has already gone into the VORG work that we've been doing, and we've got the VORG strategy coming forward, which will obviously have sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation, moreover, as a key part of it, because obviously we know that criminal exploitation affects both women and all gender children.
I think the whole country know this because of what's been going on. So what comfort can you give anybody that's watching this now that you've got enough money in the pot to make sure that we can look to see where these rape gangs are in London, and to make sure that we put special treatment into it so that we can look at this and identify this?
Yeah, I think I can give assurance that sexual exploitation of women and girls has been a long-term priority of the Mayor. It is something that, we have led on across the, Lib will be here later. The Violence Reduction Unit has led on county lines, making sure that county lines is understood by both gender and age. It's something that is not, I know that it has been made topical over the last couple of weeks, but it's been something that we've worked on for decades in London, and the work that we've been doing around sexual violence has been long-standing in that area.
Okay, I'm sure we'll come back to this. While I have your ear, the specialist operations is presented in the budget as a small source of income, but I would have thought in reality that the MPS, it costs the MPS over £500 million. So can you explain that to me, Deputy Mayor?
Well, I suppose it's in proportion to the rest of the budget, obviously, you know, and also, I mean, Dan would be able to give, you know, greater detail, but also I should imagine it's a definition of special operations, because, you know, we might think that special operations are things like counter-terrorism and other things, but they are outlined separately. But Dan, do you want to?
Yeah, the Met specialist operations are subject to specific grants from the Home Office.
Yep.
So the budget that's out of consultation is based on the core policing grant and the other elements, so the London part of the Met. And the specialist operations are funded through a separate grant. So quite often in the budget, they'll net off and look like either a zero cost or a small income line, because the Met may have received more income than it's spent on specialist operations. But I think the reason it's presented like that is the virtue of how the funding flows, and those specialist, quite often national operations are subject to specific grants that are different from what was outlined in the provisional police settlement in early December.
So I find this interesting. So where would I go to get the information on that?
On
the information on how that is funded and where those funding streams come from, where would I find that?
So in the provisional police settlement, there was specific information on I'll call it the non-London elements, but the national elements that the Met delivers. So there was a separate settlement, for example, for counter-terrorism, that was outside of the core settlement that the Home Secretary laid before the House of Commons.
Okay, we may well come back to that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. We may hear more about the... and good morning, everybody, sorry. We may hear more about the local government funding settlement, but we still have a massive underfunding of the Met Police. 240 million is apparently the figure which is being cited most often. So this is for the Deputy Mayor. What specifically are you and the Mayor doing to lobby for increased funding for the Metropolitan Police to ensure that we get the funding that we need?
Thank you, Assemblymember Roberts. Yes, I mean, you're correct to highlight the level of challenge. Obviously, this has come from a long-term problem of underfunding of the police previously. Obviously, we also know that the government have done this budget as a one-year budget, and I've been really glad that the work that we've been doing with the government, with both the Commissioner and the Mayor, to talk to the Home Office about what is needed in London has resulted some significant increases. Obviously, there's the police settlement, which has increased by 6% for the country and 6.4% for London. But also, and I want to put on record my thanks to the Police Committee for this highlighting of this issue, is the NIC, which had previously been stopped, which is the National and International Capital Cities Grant, has been reinstated and is the largest increase.
No, it's never stopped.
Oh, it was, frozen. But it's now come back at 63.4 million pounds, which is a significant increase. So we know that overall this amount means that we've seen an overall increase of...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's about the thing which I said may be spoken about. What I want to know is what you're doing to lobby for more.
Yes.
What specific meetings have you had with the Home Secretary, for example, you and the Mayor perhaps, toddling off to Whitehall?
Yeah.
What are you specifically doing?
Yes,
to
so
lobby for the
sorry, I was just outlining that our conversations so far with the Home Office and that me and the Mayor have been having has borne fruit. We've been able to illustrate, and I want to say thanks to working with the Met really collaboratively on this, having really clear numbers, really being able to illustrate the effects that, you know, having being the capital city has on our budget and the additional pressures and what we need to keep London safe. Working together on that has borne fruit, has, you know, the government are listening, and we will continue, because we know that the spending review is, you know, the long-term goal to make sure that that goes on. And I know Dan mentioned earlier, you know, the inconsistency of having to do several budgets, but I'm pleased that as well as in local government, there's green shoots on a conversation about stable funding. So we are working towards, now that we've got this initial budget through, working towards a real in-depth lobbying plan towards the spending review.
But we're still about 3/4 short of the amount which is needed. £240 million is what's needed. We've got roughly 65 million, so there's £175 million which is outstanding. And the question is, what specifically? You know, what meetings do you have any meetings with the Home Office scheduled for this month, for example, to discuss further funding?
Well, I mean, we have meetings all the time. Next week I'm going to a meeting with the Home Office around knife crime and robbery. Obviously, it's important in those meetings that I illustrate the difference between London and nationally in those areas, and why it's important that we have the financial the resources to be able to meet those needs. But also, we obviously also have specific meetings around the budget, myself and the Mayor and the Home Office, having those discussions around what will need to be done. And, you know, obviously MPs from London, ministers for policing, as well as the Home Office. And, you know, I'd also like to say it's me, the Mayor, but also we have our Victims Commissioner, who's also working closely with ministers, and also Lib, who's obviously looking, who will be here later, who are also looking at how we look at exploitation. The great thing I have to say about London is we are excellent in piloting new ways of policing and keeping safe, and that's rolled out nationally. So we continue to have these conversations where we can highlight great practice, but also illustrate the need to be able to continue doing that through the resourcing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Garbutt, you want to come in?
Thank you. Just wanted to state my support here quickly just for the work that MOPAC does as a really valuable prevention work, and see that as really essential in keeping Londoners safe. And I wanted to just follow up on the importance of funding youth services and making sure that that level is maintained, because in the manifesto it mentions 250,000 more positive opportunities for young Londoners, which states it will include like mentoring, an investment in youth workers, a particular focus on schools, pupil referral units, custody and A&E. So I just wanted to make sure that that's a fully committed and funded, a fully funded commitment, and if you are going to continue to focus on those really high quality opportunities and not kind of cheaper, maybe online support to meet that 250,000 opportunities.
No, absolutely. The priority of Londoners' safety is obviously something that the Mayor is dedicated to, but the prioritisation of keeping young people safe is his, you know, he speaks about often. Assembly Member Garbutt, that he recently rolled out a toolkit in schools around kind of negative gender views. These are things that he continues to invest in and prioritise, and that's the same with youth safety. And so, I know that will continue to be the Mayor's priority. And obviously we should always, I think it's really important, and I know we talked about this previously in a previous committee, to make sure that young people's voices are at the centre of what what they want and what they need. So I know, for example, when I was political lead for Thrive London, that actually a lot of young people said mental health support online was preferable, and some toolkits that they had through that platforms and otherwise really worked well for them. So I don't think we should, say some things are good and some things are bad. I think we need to be led by what young people hear and want. And I know that Lib would say similarly, it's really part of the strength of the Violence Reduction Unit that they engage regularly with young people, and through our children and young people strategy that we've worked on with the police, we will continue to make sure that young people and children's voices are centred, but also the support they need in the wider context around schools and youth clubs will continue to be supported, and across the wider GLA family. I think it's really important that things like free school meals, the work that we're doing in schools are all part of the work we're doing to keep young London vibrant.
That's really great to hear, and I completely agree that it's important to centre young people's voices. So I just think it's really important to maintain as well that we're just going to get these youth workers in these settings. And I know you just said to Assemblymember Hall that some of the commitments might, you can't assure that until March, but I just wondered if you can assure me that this part of the commitment is funded for 25-26.
I mean, as I previously said, we are working that all through, but, we know how important children and young people are.
Thank you. Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. Dan, just wanted to come back to the question around local government finance settlement. Obviously, you didn't know at the time that the draft was coming forward what that looked like. You've now got that. What impact has that had on the budget that you've put forward?
This is around the provisional police settlement, so let out the Home Office rather than the Department for Communities and Local Government. It's had a positive impact, and so in setting our budget, we made a number of assumptions around income above the known baseline, above what we expected to get. And so we've worked through kind of in the run up to the Christmas break, we worked through the numbers with the Home Office, and it's had a positive impact. Some of the money that has come through is recurrent, some of it is non-recurrent. So how we deploy that money is important. If it's a single year's worth of money, and some of it comes with conditions, not all of which we've seen yet, particularly around a thing called the Neighbourhood Police Fund. And so from a large £450 million gap, what the provisional police settlement did was enable us to close some of that gap, but the gap is still sizable, and so is therefore requiring a number of efficiencies and some of the tough choices that the Met will make in order to close that gap. So if I summarise what I've just said, it helped, but it didn't take a large proportion of the problem away. We're really grateful for the work that MOPAC and the GLA and the Home Office have done, a really tough spending round for the government, and we know that the Home Secretary and the Home Office work really hard in order to secure money for policing, but particularly for the Met, and we're really grateful for that. But there's work for the Met to do in order to balance the books, and about how we'll make those savings to live within our means.
Thanks. I mean, after 14 years of austerity where we had significant cuts to the Met Police and obviously the wider the MOPAC budget by default, does this mark a watershed? Sorry. Well, the Met Police, in terms of the Met Police budget, has been significantly cut over 14 years of austerity, which, interesting to hear Assemblymember Roberts' comments earlier about the importance of investment in these things, but it was the Conservative and Lib Dem coalition that started this 14 years of austerity. So, anyway, so Dan, just to say, obviously, clearly this year we've got a one-year settlement and we're looking for 3 years beyond that. But what impact do you feel that's had in terms of, is that moving in the right direction now as opposed to where we have been over the past 14 years?
So sorry to give you an accountant's response, but I'll be really prudent about our financial position. It's helped, but I've got to caveat that with we only know the budget for the next financial year, and we don't know that beyond that, because the spring spending review will settle what the envelope is through to the life of this Parliament. It certainly helped, and we're really grateful for kind of the work that the Home Secretary and her team did. There is still a significant budget gap that the Met has had to close through a series of tough choices and efficiencies in order to live within our financial means across the 25-26 financial year. The optimist in me would hope that it shows, I think the Deputy Mayor talked about green shoots before, some positive signs for what's to come in the spending review, but it's not my job to kind of predict the future. It's our job, and what Adrian and our teams are doing are putting together the best case for the investment in policing for the spending review to deliver the right outcomes for London. So it's a positive sign, but I just caveat that with it's a single year settlement. Some of the money isn't recurrent, and it does come with conditions. And sorry to keep repeating this point, but I think it's really important. We're really grateful for the work that MOPAC, GLA and Home Office have done in order to improve the settlement for the Met across 25-26.
I just wanted to repeat a point that the Deputy Mayor made earlier, that in the provisional settlement, the NIC, which has been frozen since 1920 for over a decade, the increase that we've had, the 63 million, is the largest increase that we've seen in the NIC in over a decade. So that certainly is a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. I think the main point here is that effectively this is a sort of turning point, and clearly I appreciate what you're saying, Dan, is that we haven't got the 3-year settlement. That's because the government has obviously come in and identified what money is left in the pot, what's available to do, but the direction is the right one in terms of determining that actually that this sort of investment needs to be made. As you've made the point, Amanda, I'm just going to ask that actually. So that uplift in NIC, which we've heard time and time again over very many years in terms of the need for London to get its fair share. We've heard from Assemblymember Roberts in terms of the gap, but actually this represents a 33% uplift in terms of the contribution for NIC for London, a massive leap in terms of the right direction. And how is that going to impact for the Met Police going forward, Dan? Sorry, Amanda, if you want to come on.
I will let Dan answer more capably than me, but generally NIC is, as you know, it's for policing London. It doesn't really come with any further terms and conditions, so it allows the Met an element of flexibility, which, as Dan has mentioned, we are waiting to fully understand the terms and conditions associated with a new neighbourhood policing grant. In itself, of course, really positive and pleased with the Met's allocation for it, but we need to understand exactly what it means and what the Met needs to deliver in return for that additional neighbourhood policing grant, whereas NIC doesn't come with those conditions, so it allows Met the flexibility to use it wherever their pressures are the greatest.
So Dan, just before you come in, perhaps you could also expand on that neighbourhood policing grant. It was clearly one of the key priorities that residents spoke to us about on the doorstep. They want to see more neighbourhood police. The neighbourhood policing teams have been significantly challenged over the last decade or so. I mean, I think when I came in, each Safer Neighbourhood team had 1 sergeant, 2 PCs, 3 PCSOs as a minimum. That has been severely pushed over the last few years. What do you expect to see from the neighbourhood policing grant, as well as expanding on the NIC? And then perhaps Kaya can come in. Thanks.
So all the monies that the provisional police settlement gave to the Met all helped to close that gap. The point I'd make that in generating a £450 million gap as we went into the 25-26 budgeting round, we assumed that we'd receive some additional income above the baseline. So, for example, the NIC, we'd assumed in our budget internally that we'd received up to £50 million more, to give a specific example. And so the Home Office have given us £63 million in NIC. We'd already assumed that we'd receive 50 million of that. And so the delta kind of takes away kind of some of the impact of that. And that's because in setting our budget, we wanted to make a prudent income assumption so that we could really assess what the impact would be on our services and our workforce and the people that we serve in a way that was prudent and had an eye on the income that was likely to come in. So as we go through some of these numbers, the budget that we set and the £450 million gap that we closed assumed a certain level of income above the known baseline. Adrian might want to add to what I've said, but at the heart of the new Met for London strategy is community-led neighbourhood policing. And so the government's commitment to the Neighbourhood Policing Fund, and we're still waiting to see the details of that and what the conditions will be, will enable us to put more officers on the front line, to establish relationships with communities and to police those communities more effectively. Clearly, I'm not a police officer, and so kind of I make those comments as a CFO rather than kind of an operational lead. But the increase in NIC helps us to fund and bear those unique pressures of policing capital and international city, and the increase in funding as a result of the Neighbourhood Policing Fund will help us really kind of fund to a better extent, but not a full extent, our ambitions for community policing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not operational either, just to set the tone, but I think the important point that Dan describes there is that the efficiencies and the tough choices that the Met will be faced with won't be applying across the whole of the organisation. We will clearly, and we have worked closely with MOPAC colleagues in terms of understanding priorities and sort of link a couple of conversations together. We've got a clear understanding that we're protecting neighbourhoods and we're protecting the work on VORG as part of a prioritisation process that we have gone through in the budget. You'll appreciate in terms of timing, we're not able to go into a huge amount of detail because actually the consultation is still live, the Home Office announcement has just arrived, and we're having to work through the detail of what that means in terms of the scope and scale across the organisation. But just to give you that sense of priorities, neighbourhoods and VORG are two of the things that we work together to protect as part of the budget process.
Those two will be priorities. Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on your point that I do think that, you know, you rightly say that in difficult times, you know, good politics is the art of prioritisation. And I think, you know, that being true nationally, it's really, I think, a positive indication that, you know, this government has given us the largest increase in NIC for a decade. That is significant, and I think really speaks to the understanding of this government that we are the capital city and have different you know, pressures than elsewhere. I know that, you know, my colleagues up and down the country face difficult financial pressures too and are working through this, but I'm glad that the police settlement has increased overall. But I do think it's important that we've seen this uplift for London. And similarly, I just wanted to put on record my thanks to the Commissioner in this space around neighbourhoods. From the minute he's come in, he has prioritised neighbourhood policing, and the new Met for London plan speaks to that. You know, I'm sure those of us who've been in local government previously have seen that uplift around local officers having greater consistency and increasing. And I went to the police convention a few weeks ago where the Home Secretary spoke about the importance of neighbourhood policing, so that alignment throughout the system is something that I think is really going to be something really helpful for Londoners. I know that we all feel the importance of kind of tackling that kind of ASB, high volume crime. You know, in the Police and Crime Committee, we've discussed a lot robbery, shoplifting, and so having the resources in the Met, but also moreover, you know, we have the Robbery Partnership Board with MOPAC and the criminal justice system, and working with the police to try and really tackle that community crime. But I do think you're completely right, as said by Adrian, that connection with community and having police officers within the community that know their patch and, you know, are able to do that is something that I'm really proud that we have full alignment from the top to the bottom on now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dan, you mentioned that some of the money that you have coming in is recurring, some of it not, and some has conditions attached. I think once you've had a chance to digest it, I think this committee would appreciate those details so that we can see that as well. And the policing board papers in September 2023 stated that there were thousands of officers that could be released into frontline quite quickly. And my plea to you on lobbying, Madam Deputy Mayor, is that you lobby on that point really, so that the Commission has flexibility in that local neighbourhood policing uplift. Because without that, I think Londoners will be shortchanged yet again. If you could be very quick, Madam Deputy Mayor, because I need to make progress on the agenda.
Just quickly, something we talked at the last Police and Crime Committee about, but also something that we directly had conversation about with the Commissioner about that civilianisation to push officers rightly back into frontline policing.
Thank you. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you, Chair. And I do think I have to start by dispelling some of these myths that are being thrown around. It is a fact that despite a global pandemic and global conflict, this last government left this government a much better position than the coalition government found in 2010. And it is a fact that it was the previous Labour government that introduced austerity, and it was the coalition government that continued with that plans, reducing the severity of those plans, because for a fact, we would have lost our local hospital where I live, and it was the coalition government that made sure it stayed open, and later the Conservative government that chose to invest in refurbishing it. Those are the facts of what was found for this Labour government. And when we look at the provisional government finance settlement, we see councils now in North East London raising the alarm over the money they've been given. In Havering, the council leader said that the government give with one hand and take with the other. In Redbridge, the council leader has said it is just a drop in the ocean. And one of the main reasons for this is the increase that the government has decided to make to national insurance contributions. What is the effect on that on the Met's budget?
So one of the things that's in the provisional police settlement is that the increase in national insurance contributions for the employer are funded by additional grant.
What is the costs, please?
The specific costs.
44.8 was received. If I may come in, the NI grant received as part of the provisional settlement was 44.8 million.
And was that the entire cost to the Met?
Of the initial salary of all staff and officers, yes.
What additional things, Kaya, could you have done with £44 million as a grant, apart from paying national insurance contributions?
I mean, what I would say is it's really important, you know, I'm not going to... I think that having really national insurance, good taxation, that we can reinvest in public services, especially
But you are a public service.
Yeah.
And now there's public services in the local government receive £500 million across the country, which could have been invested in public services and is going straight back in. It doesn't make sense. You could have had that money instead. We're saying an initial 44 million. To be honest, I don't buy it, because we need subcontractors. There's a lot of other ways in which this is going to bump up prices. When we go to do capital projects for etc., when we go to buy new vehicles, when we go to buy new equipment, all of the national insurance raises are going to hit those costs as well. It's not just necessarily the direct impact.
Well, I mean, what I would say, I think, you know, as Amana said, the Home Office has included that cost in the grant, so that's not directly coming, you know, they're not pouring money in and then taking that same money away. They've made provision for that. But I do think overall, you know, we've been left in a space where we need to rebuild the economy, and part of that is the fact that, as you have well illustrated, that local government, you know, the NHS, many public sector services, you know, across the remit have been decimated, and to be able to rebuild those public services, you know, we're all going to have to contribute to that.
So you don't, but then how do we rebuild? So you've understood the direct cost. Do you not understand that there will be an indirect cost as well from national insurance rises to the Met's budget?
I mean, you know, not to be too political about it, but, you know, when we've been coming out of an economy where, you know, one of the other areas we are particularly struggling with in this budget is inflation. That is something not of, this, it has been made up previously. I would rather personally pay more in national insurance, knowing that that's coming back into public services, rather than, and that will have a bearing across the budget. But
I think you're still not understanding. So, for example, a roof breaks in one of the stations, right? We need to get contractors in to pay that. The price will now increase.
No, I understand completely your point, Assembly Member Best. But my point is, there has been, exactly on that point, in construction places, the economy was in such a bad state when I was in local government. I was constantly terrified about the cost of concrete because of where the economy got us to. At least I take some comfort in knowing that this additional cost is national insurance. It's taxation that's going to go back into the overall public sector and national government pot. That means that there's positive reinvestment elsewhere.
It doesn't make any sense, and your understanding of it doesn't make any sense either. Okay, coming on to the final...
I think let's just be wary of how all the words we're using when we're commenting and making statements.
It doesn't make any sense, though. It
didn't make any sense.
You were quite personal in your remarks, so...
I will, but I don't... To say something doesn't make sense, I think it's quite fair, if it doesn't make sense.
Carry on, Assembly Member Best, to the question.
Thank you. So finally, we see the new draft police and crime plan published. What is the impact of that on the budget?
We were obviously, I started in October. The police and crime plan was, already underway, under drafting. But I think the brilliant thing about the timing of that is, as Dan and Adrian and Aman have laid out previously, that has been built alongside the current budget conversations. So we've been exceptionally mindful in the drafting of the police and crime plan, and it's a draft out to consultation of the affordability of that plan. And you'll note in the plan that we regularly refer to the pressures, the constraints that are contextual to that. So we're definitely mindful of the budget, and we want to make sure that it's an ambitious plan, because we have great ambitions for the safety of London, but that we're not setting ourselves up to fail and not be able to realise those ambitions because of the budgetary constraints we are under.
As you go into the consultation plans on that, do you plan to engage with local council leaders? Who's your kind of stakeholders that you'll be talking to, and obviously with the budgetary aspect of that as well, what will your answers be to where they, I presume, say we'd like more funding in certain areas?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. Our stakeholders, I've been really clear that I want this to be a plan that is widely engaged on. It's something that, from everything to using platforms like Talk London to specific sessions with stakeholders we'll be leading on. We've already done stakeholder sessions with representatives from the disabled community, representatives from the LGBTQ+ community, and we'll continue to do that more widely. On local government, we have already agreed the grant from MOPAC to local governments so that they have that reassurance that they will get funding to work on those community safety aspects that they want to work on, and that's across all of the London boroughs. But I think the great wonder of London in itself is having such strong partnerships, and what we're able to achieve through those partnerships in this area is significant. I know that the work that we're doing, for example, on young people is a contribution between local government, education and MOPAC. Similarly, before Christmas, I went to Lambeth to meet our integrated monitoring of offenders, which is a multi-agency with local government, police, probation, mental health services and others to reduce reoffending of those people on probation. So, you know, it's definitely something that I want us to hold as, you know, our plan, but also a wider stakeholder plan.
Thank you. Yeah, but the question was more around speaking to the council leaders, obviously around the funding kind of concerns and how they will be funded, but perhaps we can catch up on that.
What I will say is obviously Councillor Mo Butt, leader of Brent Council, is the nominated lead for community safety. He sits on the London Policing Board with us, and we will, you know, definitely take the plan to London councils. So, you know, I was the local authority leader, proud of that, and I know the importance that local authority leaders, especially in this space, have as key stakeholders in delivering safety for London.
Okay, and what are the Mayor's new enhanced control requirements that are referred to in the draft police and crime plan? I don't know. Can you take that?
Forgive me, Assembly Member Best, I'm not sure if there were some additional control requirements from a budgetary perspective that between the Mayor's Office and MOPAC we applied to the Mets, given the financial position. They've been in place throughout the 24-25 financial year. Examples include, and MOPAC should not take credit for this because this was the Mets activity, the fact that the Mets now produce monthly financial reports in addition to quarterly financial reports. So we get a view of year-to-date actual performance, and the forecast for the end of the year is only updated every quarter. That's now reviewed, always has been reviewed by MOPAC, but it's reviewed by the subcommittee of the London Policing Board, the Performance and Finance Delivery Committee. The last meeting of that was September, October time, where we looked at Q2 performance. That's one example. There are there has been an updated governance structure within the Met to evaluate in-year financial performance and also investment business cases. I, as the MOPAC CFO, sit on the key governance group in the Met, which has recently been rebadged as the Investment and Portfolio Group. As you know, the scheme of delegation requires that all investment in excess of £500,000 comes to the Deputy Mayor for approval. Prior to it being seen by the Deputy Mayor, it's scrutinised by myself and my team, and we ensure value for money is maximised before any business cases go to the Deputy Mayor for approval. Those are just some of the features of the control regime on the budget.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Kaya, in what year is it that you think that the government didn't give increased funding to the Met? That's something you alluded to earlier with Assembly Mahfouz.
No, apologies. Let me clarify, Assembly Member Beth. The previous government only increased the funding by 2% between 2010 and 2024. Obviously, given levels of demand, that meant a real-term cut of 1.1 billion, a third of the budget overall, and that's based on ONS inflation rate figures from November 2024.
Thanks. So just so we're clear, funding went up every year under the previous government. So I think it's just...
Yeah, but not in line with demand and what's needed.
Went up.
So it was a real-term cut of 1.1 billion.
Yes, but funding went up every year. So I think it's important to use the right term when you're talking about that.
Well, not if... I mean, I just want to clarify that that left a significant gap of 1.1 billion.
And I understand
means that
we're not arguing over that. I think we could be here all afternoon. I want to move on because we're quite... we need to press on the agenda. Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan, what are your options for delivering the £228 million of cross-business group savings in 25-26?
So we're just working through the detail of this. We had the provisional police settlement from central government, and out of the GLA consultation process, there'll be a confirmation of the precept increase plus any additional funding from the Mayor of London. What we've been doing, as you'd expect, since kind of the summer, is planning on how we close that gap. We're really keen to be efficient and to demonstrate value for money, so we've set up a efficiency programme that will look at, if I summarise, kind of try to put a label on it, how do you do the same with less? So take out inputs, and that's what the efficiency programme's designed to do. And we have designed an efficiency programme that takes out 2.5% of our budget, so that's around £100 million. Together with a series of tough choices. We've not finalised that list yet. We are working through how we'd implement that and what the consequences and the impact in these independencies would be. They would change the size and shape of the Met's workforce, but we can't finalise that until we finalise the conversation with our funders and the oversight body. So there's two aspects to my response. An efficiency programme that, frankly, we should be doing anyway. And so we're already getting on with that. And that's off the back of year-on-year efficiency savings that the Met have liked. Adrian and I's challenge to the organisation and what we're leading is, I want efficiencies that are recurrent and are not a one-off savings, so that they genuinely reduce our operating baseline. So that's the efficiency side of it. The remainder will be tough choices, and how those land and where those land are subject to ongoing discussions, because we've not got through to the end of the process yet.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And Dan, once again, you sort of touched on it already. Is it realistic to expect staff costs to be below the 23-24 level in 25-26, given the trend of increasing staff costs that have been seen?
Potentially. I mean, as you'll understand, the main driver of the staff costs is the size of the workforce. And unless and until we know the final settlement from funders, we can't determine, we can't kind of crystallise our workforce plans for the 25-26 financial year. If the 25-26 workforce were smaller than the 23-24 workforce, even adjusted for pay inflation, you could expect to see a reduced pay bill if you compare year on year. And I apologise for keeping repeating caveats, but until we get to the end of the process and we know what the settlement looks like, we don't know what the final pay budget will be for 25-26, because we need to know what the income or the funding is available. But in direct answer to your question, yes, you could expect it to be low if the workforce were to be smaller.
Thank you, and that sort of leads me on to my next question, because obviously there is the very real prospect of a cut of around 2,300 officers in the Met in London, which I think would be devastating, particularly on crime. But then also compounding that, we've got the NIC rise, minimum wage rise, we've covered that already. We're not going to get back into that again, don't worry. So therefore, this leads me on to my question on recruitment, because obviously we've got a lot of people leaving, we're not being able to hit our targets. And so as far as you're aware, and I appreciate, I'm happy, I don't want everyone to answer, but someone that's best placed to answer, welcome. As far as you're aware, has the new government offered the Mayor and Mopac another opportunity to make use of the £61 million recruitment funding which the Mayor lost previously?
I'm not aware of the answer to the direct question, but let me just pick up on attrition and recruitment, because I think it's a really valid point that you make. So attrition is actually running below the forecast levels that we thought as we started to build the budget for 25-26, and is actually slightly below national average in policing. So, you know, there is a sense that our attrition is holding. In terms of recruitment, we are going to have to reduce the levels at which we recruit as we start to work through the implications to the workforce. The lesson that we have learnt both in the Met but also across public services is not to turn off recruitment, because it's very hard to turn it back on again if you do that. So we are, as an executive team, working through the balance of at what level are you going to recruit to, in terms of making sure that you can live within the budget but also keep the churn of new officers, particularly in the diversity sense, where we recruit more diverse officers than we do currently hold within the organisation. So there's a sense of how do we carry on recruiting and at what level that will be. best estimates probably sort of, half to a quarter is the sort of term that we'll be looking at in terms of how you'd need to deal with the attrition that happens, and then which bits will you need to recruit into. So it's a complicated balance of attrition, recruitment and expectation going forward. But just picking up on an earlier point, I think one of the key things we will have to work through as an organisation is how can we deliver the civilianisation, because that is where we get the best value for the salaries that we pay to police officers to be on the front line, and to make sure that we recruit staff into those areas where their expertise would add most value to an organisation. And clearly New Met for London talks a lot about fixing the foundation, and I think over the last year I would say the Commissioner and the Deputy have done an amazing job in fixing foundations across the organisation. So just understanding the basics of how organisations run and improving our HR functions, improving our finance functions, creating a strategy function, allowing us to have the sort of data you would expect on workforce that then allows these more nuanced conversations rather than turn off, turn on, but actually how do you then deal with those levels of recruitment and attrition?
No, and I think that's a very comprehensive answer, and I appreciate all of those, the various facets of dealing with this particular problem. I think what will be helpful, and I appreciate you may not have done the forecasting already, as where we'll be at year end with recruitment and total numbers for 25-26. But if you could write to the committee based on what you've just said, Adrian, that'd be very helpful to know. Madam Deputy Mayor, so therefore I'll put this to you. Have you or the Mayor lobbied at all for recovery of that 61 million for recruitment that was lost by the Mayor previously? Just on that one specific issue.
Yes, and I know that the Home Office is something that they are prioritising, obviously in London, but across the country, is the uplift in officers, as previously discussed, around neighbourhood policing. I know that obviously the Mayor himself has invested significant amounts of money to sustain the number of officers and increase, like 500 PCSOs. So it is something that continues to be a priority, but understanding the very context and challenge of recruitment in policing and in London.
Yeah, no, I get all that, and I know you're the Mayor's appointee, and everything he does is wonderful. But my point is, there was a significant amount of money lost in not meeting our recruitment targets. I'm not saying it's all dreamy and everyone's flooding to join the Met, because obviously there are other challenges which I know Assemblymember Hall covers in her committee. But my question is, if you had a key ask of the government around this 61 million, would you say, could you please give us 61 million? And you can even say, put it within a multi-year settlement, a like-for-like figure.
Just for my clarity of understanding, do you mean just solely for recruitment of new officers?
This is for the recruitment, yeah. I'm not looking for a total increase in the budget. I'm just saying that's 61 million for recruitment.
Well, not to give a complicated answer back, but I think, as said by Adrian, recruitment of what and for whom, I think it's really important for us to understand the needs of frontline officers.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether that is what's actually needed currently. Adrian's just said, police staffing would go a long way to improve frontline neighbouring officers. Also, I do think we can't say that without understanding the real challenges for, metropolitan potential officers in London, given the housing crisis, given the cost of living.
Sorry, just to make a point on that. Sorry, Madam Deputy Mayor, I do apologise. The point I'm trying to make is there is a real threat of a reduction of 2,300 officers. The Mayor committed at the election, which he won fair and square, an additional, 1,300? Mm-hmm. So my point being is, I'm not implying, well, maybe I am, it sounds like you're contradicting what the Mayor has put in his manifesto. Either he wants the increase in frontline officers or he doesn't. And part of that is getting that extra £61 million back from the government. So surely I would think that is an ask that you would want, isn't it?
No, obviously.
Yeah, all right, there we go. That's fine. That's okay. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, no, just to, if I may, Chair, just to clarify that obviously we all want more frontline officers. Right. I think, you know, as you've outlined, you know, how best that is, you know, profiled across years, understanding. I just don't want to overpromise and underachieve.
But the direction is we want more frontline officers, and yes, we would love £61 million from this new government to recruit those frontline officers.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good to ask for more money. That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Apologies for being
no, that's all right.
Careful with government money.
It's taxpayer money.
Yeah, taxpayer money, national money.
Assemblymember Garbutt.
Thanks. Just some quick questions, because I know we're running short on time. Dan, I'm just looking through the budget. This was raised with me from a councillor across London. Someone mentioned the Asset Recovery Incentivisation Scheme, ARIS, is it referred to as that? I couldn't see any details in it, so I just wondered if that's something we're still receiving and how we use that money.
So the budget that's consulted on is a MOPAC document that talks about our different funding mechanisms. From my knowledge, so I'll kind of just caveat because I'm only 6 months into the role, it is something that we still receive. I'm happy to take away and write to you on the specifics of that. But to my knowledge, yes, we still receive it. It's not a material income stream against the core grant, the precept and other elements that the Met is funded by.
I support everything that Dan said, and just to say it's not only is it not material, it's also not a reliable funding stream because it's dependent on assets recovered. It's also linked to the PPAF, the Police Property Act Fund. So some of these assets are recoverable by the individuals from whom they are taken from. So it's only the residual amount that are not recovered and that are allowed to be retained within statutory limits that we're allowed to retain and translate into income after a certain period of time has passed.
Yeah. That's really helpful to understand, because the councillor I was speaking to was saying that previously local authorities had more kind of involvement of how it was spent. So it'd be just good to understand if you could write to me about what it is and how it kind of works now. That would be really good to understand. Another question was just on, because Dan, you mentioned efficiencies, and I started my career in the local authorities and the NHS working as a commissioner at the time of the beginning of austerity, so in 2010. So I've had to lead a lot of kind of decommissioning and efficiency programmes. And in the NHS, we had to really do like a proper review and really show a cost benefit and kind of evidence-based for any decisions that we were making. And I've just struggled to see that in some of the Met's decisions. Like, for example, police in schools increased, doubled in 10 years, with what I understand there was kind of no review or kind of decision-making around those officers increasing in schools. Things like live facial recognitions being rolled out at speed, and we're only getting the annual review in September. And things like drug policing, we've seen increase in death, increase in toxic supply, increase in violence, increase in children being exploited, but no kind of cost and benefit analysis, because I've been asking the Mayor in Mayor's questions, written questions, how much money goes on policing of drugs, and I haven't had a value back. So I just feel like, I just want to understand the decisions that are taken around that cost-benefit analysis of some of the policing activities.
So as a team, and speaking on behalf of, I hope the Deputy Mayor, but certainly the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner, we're determined to spend taxpayer money well. And so we're very careful with it. And as I said in an answer to an earlier question, we've purposely set ourselves, faced with a £450 million gap, a challenging 2.5% efficiency target for the Met. And that will be hard to deliver, but we think it's deliverable, and we're putting the mechanisms in place well ahead of the 1st of April in order to deliver that. In terms of value for money, and kind of not a tongue-in-cheek point, but I used to be an auditor and a value for money auditor, so it's incredibly important to me, as I know it is to MOPAC, as well as Met colleagues. I can't talk about historical decisions, but I can give you a flavour of what we do now. So any investment decisions go through a gated, as you'd expect from your experience in local government and the NHS, a business case outlined through to full business case that is clear on the cashable and non-cashable benefits and the risks attached with that investment. And what we do through, Amana referred to before, the investment and portfolio group, we track the spend, we track the benefits, and we track the progress of those investments that we make. Because public money is limited and we want to spend it well. And so I've not got an answer for you, sorry, on the specific. You gave a couple of examples. But Adrian, as the chair of IPG, and myself as the vice chair, we are really holding colleagues' feet to the fire about, is this value for money? What will the Met and the MOPAC get for that money? And how can you assure us of its delivery? And IPG has been in place since the late summer. It's now a monthly part of our governance process. And I can assure you that every investment decision we make goes through there. What I can't do is look back and kind of how that applies.
Yeah, it would be really good to understand, maybe separately and outside of this, how that works for drug policing, because it'd be really interesting to understand what benefits attract for the policing of drugs to justify the investment in that policing, because obviously I've just listed the fact that everything's got worse, so it would be really good to understand the specifics, but I know it's probably outside of here. Oh, I want to come in.
Just briefly to say that obviously there is the kind of understanding of policing of drugs in its, simplest form of, rightly applying the law and moving forward with that. But I just wanted to remind Assembly Member Garbett that through the work that we do on the London Drugs Board, working with the NHS, working with the Met, we've
Madam
created...
Sorry to cut you off there, because I think we're sort of wading into the issues.
Yeah,
rather
it was
than,
specifically on the money and how the money is used, but it's good to
the
understand.
value for money point is well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one more quick question that's on, I think it's to Deputy Mayor and Amana, on links to what we've just been talking about in terms of trust. I note that the MOPAC budget lists, there was spend of 24-25, there was spend of 10 million on trust, and only some kind of, from the information we've got, it's only kind of headline activity. I wanted to know if you've got some specific funded examples, like where you can point to X 100,000 was spent on this under the trust banner, because I'm struggling to understand if it's staff time, consultancies for training, activities, like how that adds up to 10 million and why it's increased to 11.6 or 8 in the 25-26 budget.
If I give the overview and then Amana comes back with those specific numbers, I think it's really important to understand that, obviously on the back of the case review, the importance of trust and confidence. And I was really impressed to see MOPAC's work in the actual analysis of the 9 areas that has been proven to work on trust and confidence. And I know that all of the work that they are funding and commissioning and working through in that area comes under that evidence base. But Amana, do you have those?
This might be something that we write to you separately, Assembly Member Garbett, on. I can give you one example. So we, within MOPAC, we invest 1.2 million specifically on community scrutiny activity, and that's with a specific purpose of increasing trust and confidence. But we've gone through every element of programmatic spend within MOPAC to classify it according to those themes that you've mentioned. So I can give you a full breakdown of
that. That would be really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next line of questioning is on officer recruitment and funding. And just mindful, it's an area that we've covered already quite extensively, so please try and be brief and try not repeat what's already been said. I just want to make sure that we stick to time. So Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. Dan, the cost of officers and staff must be a massive proportion of the budget. What percentage, very approximately, is that?
4/5.
Really? Gosh. Okay. So what assumed number of police officers and staff in your 2025-26 budget? What have you assumed there to be?
So we've assumed that we will close this financial year with a full-time equivalent of 32,752 officers. As we've touched on a couple of times, we're working through what the additional provisional police grant monies means for us and what the conditions are attached in terms of what that means for our net recruitment plans. And so I don't have a endpoint for the 25-26 financial year until we've worked through how that money will be applied and what that means for our recruitment plans.
I know, but you must have assumed something for that budget. Are you assuming the same amounts? Because you must have put a figure in there.
And so I kind of play back what the Commissioner said to the London Policing Board.
I'm sorry, we're not there.
So, yeah,
And he won't come to the democratically elected police and crime committee, which is a shame. So all these things get said, and those of us that are actually elected to go on the police and crime board don't get to hear these things. So you must assume we don't know some of the stuff that's discussed there.
I'll just come back on kind of the assumptions in the budget on workforce, but I suspect we might want to pick up on the Commissioner's attendance, and because I think he'd expect us to respond to that. So in the 25-26 budget, what Sir Mark said to the London Policing Board in December, there was a potential of a officer reduction of up to 2,300 in terms of London policing strength. And so, as kind of is in the public domain, we expect to end this year on 32,752 officers, and running through the budget assumptions in terms of workforce shift in the 25-26 financial year is a officer reduction for London policing of 2,300 officers.
A reduction of 2,300 officers, and that is what you've put into this budget, that fewer amount of officers in London.
Subject to the provisional police.
I get that,
yeah.
But you obviously had to have a working number, so your working number was just over 30,000.
Yeah, we can do the math, but yes,
Yeah,
it was 23.
well, it is, and it's frightening for all of those of us that really care about policing. If you were to say the cost of a police officer now, and I know there's a big spectrum, what figure do you actually work off?
So we work on a average cost of a police officer of £77,000.
Right, okay, thank you. I understand.
And I know you'll expect me to stress this. That's a very broad average.
No, I completely
just to make
get
the
that,
point.
and I'm grateful, because we used to work on something 63, 64 when we were looking at budget amendments. Just one very quick one, because I'm aware of time. You mentioned that there were tough choices. Of course there are, clearly, at the moment. And one of the things you put about reducing the number of investigations into historic crimes committed many years or decades ago. Well, obviously that perked my attention, because the here and now is dire, and we need people doing things, you know, dealing with rape gangs, dealing with shoplifting and God knows what else. Well, that particular one interested me. How much would that save if you stopped, not the ones that happened a year ago, but I mean the ones that go on for decades? How much, you've obviously costed it up because it's under a tough choice, but I suspect many people would be not happy to see that go, but certainly would rather they weren't, their neighbours weren't subject to the burglary and the knife crime and the shoplifting, etc. I think the public would understand that on some of them.
Yeah, I don't have an exact figure on what we spend across all of those historic investigations. You'll appreciate that's not a single pot that we do. There is a range of those historic investigations.
No, and normally I would have accepted that, but it's under the tough choices. So if you're going to put down a tough choice, you must have put a figure against it, because it can't be open-ended.
Yeah.
Dan?
Again, I'll caveat this, but I won't repeat all my caveats.
I get it.
So in our internal analysis, we assumed a potential saving of up to £500,000.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask the Deputy Mayor regarding these worst-case scenario cuts which are mentioned in our report. Taking, for example, the Royal Parks Police, what saving would be made by cutting the Royal Parks Police?
I mean, these are the, like, as Dan and others have said previously, these are things that we're working through. And obviously, you know, we'd want to be, I think it's really important that we'd have, you know, really important conversations with, you know,
there must be a figure
Corporation and, you know, those, and the Royal Parks.
No, but there must be a figure.
Have you got the figure, Dan?
there are figures,
Mm-hmm.
but what we've got to work through is the funding that we've now received through the provisional police settlement. We need to wait for the mayor to confirm.
No.
what the
You don't need to do that. You must know what the cost of saving would be of cutting the Royal Parks Police. Surely, it doesn't matter whether you're going to get more money. You might be able to save it because you've got that money coming in. You must know what the figure is if it was to go.
So, yes. The very reason we started the work early on the budget was so that we could hit the ground running from the 1st of April.
Okay.
And so in setting the budget and closing that £450 million gap, we did a lot of work to evaluate how we'd close that gap and the level of potential savings that some of the tough choices could generate. We're currently working through what those tough choices will be as we implement them in light of the kind of changing funding envelope, and to cement what the savings will be as a result of them as we work through the savings. A lot of the savings are delivered by attrition because a number of police officers leave the force each year, and the way that the Met will reduce its workforce is by recruiting a portion of attrition. And so one of the things that we will monitor through our budget implementation is where is that attrition falling, where do we want to deploy the workforce, and that will really quantify what the saving will be. Before we know that and before we've planned that, any kind of number is really indicative.
Okay. What I would like to know as well is there will be operational consequences to cutting units such as the Royal Parks Police, to downgrading the dogs team, to downgrading the mounted police, to downgrading the flying squads, to reducing the number of armed units. Just on the Parks Police, because I represent South West London, we have Bushey and Richmond Park. Together, a combined square kilometrage, roughly the size of your old borough, 14.5 square kilometres in size, with specialist knowledge, very specific crimes which only really happen in the Royal Parks. For example, people going in at night with dogs in order to stampede the deer to try to get the antlers to come off so that the antlers can then be sold on eBay. There will be operational costs incurred as a result of this cut. So what assessment has been made of the knock-on operational costs, which will be made by needing to ask safer neighbourhood teams who are not equipped to deal with that level of that specific type of crime? I mean, it would be nice, by the way, if we'd had somebody from the operational team here to answer these questions. I notice we don't have the Commissioner or somebody from the operational side of the Metropolitan Police again, but there we go. Who wishes to answer?
Chair, may I say overall, and then if you want to add, Adrian, I think it's really important, as the Commissioner and as Dan has said, that this work has been a long time in the planning, and you know, one of the things that I've really taken to heart from my conversations with the Commissioner is that his care for the workforce and the impact of any saving overall has been really thought through. So I know that he has set up working groups to look at every possible
I appreciate
choice.
nobody wants to make these cuts, but it's the knock-on consequences which are the important things.
Which is what I'm trying to answer about, sorry.
But if we maybe can speed up to that bit, that'd be helpful.
Apologies. But just to say that impact and, you know, the operational side of it is why he's being so prudent about it. And, you know, I'm grateful that we've been able to work kind of as a team, and we'll continue to discuss the impacts, because it's really important about the things that you understand from your perspective might not be known within the MPS, and it's important that we get those kind of exterior views on those proposals.
I'm sure they do know. I'm sure they do know the operational
I said might. I'm just saying that the local.
So, please.
Just on the operational point, clearly this is the Finance Committee. You have the finance and the lead for the delivery of the change processes here. So, you know, we are hopefully the experts that you would want to see at this committee. But I will take away your point about whether uniforms are more appropriate.
No, not more appropriate. It's an additional.
On your direct question, I mean, they are tough choices for a reason, as you alluded to. You know, we wouldn't necessarily be wanting to make any of these choices, and you know, clearly some of the funding conversations that we've had will allow us to look at whether we decide to stop some of those tough choices, whether we reduce each of the tough choices. That's the work that we're currently building up at the moment. I can assure you that each of the strands will have operational leaders involved in terms of the understanding of the operational impact, and all of those will be played through as part of the work that we're doing now to make that assessment on which of the tough choices we need to proceed with. We will do so in consultation with colleagues from MOPAC, but I can assure you those operational impacts are being worked up, they're being understood, and then they will come back through the decision-making process, which we've sort of alluded to throughout this process. But just to articulate it, there will be a set of executive team decisions with MOPAC colleagues about which of the tough choices we will pursue in full and which of the tough choices we will look to either defer because some of the money may allow us to do so, or we may reduce the level of tough choice that we, because of the operational impact. So just to assure you, all of those things are being considered in the round as part of the plan that we're now working up to deliver what will be a really difficult set of both efficiencies and tough choices.
Okay, just one final question for the Deputy Mayor. Are there anything on the tough choices list which you would count as red lines that you would not veto, but make the strongest representations to the Commissioner that you would not accept that cut?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, any choices that, you know, would be counter to anything in the police and crime plans or things that we want to work through. I know there's, you know, the Mayor's particularly passionate about access, so, you know, things like the counters that were in the manifesto. Something.
No, but they're not on the list of the tough choices. That's a manifesto commitment to keep the 24-hour counter in each borough. So, for example, would you oppose directly the cutting of the Royal Parks Police? Would you oppose directly the cutting of flying squad numbers?
I would want to make sure that, as I think it's
It's a really easy question. Would you oppose? Would you oppose the downgrading of the dogs units, the mounted police?
If you could get around sex.
Assembly Member Roberts, if I might answer.
You may. Well, I would like you to.
Assembly Member Roberts, just let her answer.
Okay.
I think it's really important that the work that the teams are doing to make sure that the full impact is understood, both on workforce and impact on London, is, you know, put in front of me, really digested before I do that, because as you know, being in a local authority, this is a budget. So if you're not doing one thing, you're doing something else. So it needs to be a balanced assessment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Assembly Member Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Dan, I'm going to finish up this round and then I'm going to come to you, Kaya, for questions on the new Met for London. But Dan, how many police officers are you looking to release from back office roles during 25-26?
Sorry to go back to an answer, but we don't yet know, so I can't give you a number. Part of the plan in terms of implementing this budget is to civilianise certain roles that are currently fulfilled by police officers. As we finalise the funding settlement and we finalise the series of efficiencies and tough choices, there will be civilianisation, but until we've worked through the process, sure. I'm not in a position to put a number on it.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry. Madam Deputy Mayor for Policing, what is assumed as included in the 25-26 budget for new Met for London, and what is currently not affordable?
Sorry.
So what is assumed as included in the 25-26 budget for new Met for London, and what's not affordable right now?
I mean, not to reiterate the point, obviously we're still working through all of that, but I think it's really, as Adrian said previously, it's really important that, A, we understand that the new Met for London is prioritised, but what we want to work through is the affordability, but also the when, and that's really key because we want to take, and I have to say I've seen this firsthand, the decisions in the new Met for London that have the greatest impact in terms of actually as the Commissioner talks about building the foundations, fixing the foundations, and I've seen that a lot in the IT space, the investment in IT in the Met. Not only, I think, improves policing, but also improves efficiency going forward. So it's modernising. So we would want to prioritise things like that, whereas we may want to defer some of the other areas of the new Met for London plan, which need to be done, but can be slowed down. And I think it's really important that, as discussed previously, we get the spending review as well to make sure that that's key to that. But I want to give assurance to the committee that the new Met for London plan is, part of the Commissioner's plan, has been prioritised in this budget and is prioritising the policing and crime plan, because we know on the back of the Casey report how important it is.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Hall? No? Member Roberts?
I was off my papers. Sorry, Chair.
It's not. We're on 12.
Oh, we're on 12.
Aren't we on 12? No, we're on 14.
We're on 14. Right, here we go. Question for Dan. When will the estate strategy be completed and published? Oh, sorry, I've got it down.
So I'm going to pass to...
yes, of course.
Yeah, so the executive team have considered the estate strategy and while recognising it's an unaffordable estate strategy, we have the estate strategy in place. Those conversations will continue with MOPAC and other colleagues in terms of prioritising, and as we've talked about earlier, the spending review will actually be the opportunity where we'll start to look at how the estate strategy may become more affordable. We are clearly doing ongoing work on our buildings, particularly those which aren't fit for purpose in terms of the conditions that we expect our officers to work within. So there is existing funding already going ahead, but the estate strategy has been discussed by the executive team and has been talked through with colleagues, but as currently is unaffordable. We'll be looking at publication dates this year. Following the budget work that we're doing in terms of setting an aspiration, it will be probably unaffordable at this point.
You'll forgive me for wanting to narrow down this year, given that we are at the 7th of January. So we have the entire year stretching before us. Could we be a bit more specific? This quarter? This month?
I would expect it to be this quarter, I think. I mean, you will appreciate we've got quite a lot of work happening in the strategic space. So as we start to build towards the KC review that's due in March, as we start to work up our spending review plans for the summer, and the estate strategy will form part of that strategic work that we're doing across the organisation. So while I hope you don't hold me to, as you say, on the 7th of January, but I would hope that this quarter would be a reasonable position.
Okay, there will be items within the estate, which could be offloaded. It won't need to be the case that the estate strategy finally balances the books. I know you said it's unaffordable at the moment. So, for example, my pet subject of Teddington Police Station, there may be the opportunity to start divesting some parts of the estate rather than wait for a fully costed, fully balanced, fully working estate strategy. Is that likely to be the case?
Yeah, I mean, I'll look to MOPAC colleagues, obviously, in terms of the sale of assets. But yes, as part of a strategic approach, absolutely that will be part of it. But Amana, you may want to pick up the direct question.
I hate to give a cyclical answer, but as you know, we are working through the implications of the provisional police settlement, as colleagues have mentioned. That will allow us to finalise the position on officer numbers. We were waiting with anticipation about the neighbourhood policing grant, which we now know a little bit more of, subject to understanding the terms and conditions more fully. And it's only when we understand our full workforce, including the frontline officers, will, I think, the Met will, it's only at that point will the Met be in a position to confirm its estate requirement. So I would not want them to be in a position where they propose the divestment of estates, the disposal of any buildings, until they confirm what their workforce profile looks like. And so now that we have the provisional settlement, we're working through what that means for officer numbers and staff. And we can then lead to a conversation about what that means for the estate requirement.
Okay. The problem that we have there, of course, is that there are assets which are sitting on the books which are clearly surplus to requirements, and I will cite Teddington Police Station as an example. So we have our 24-hour front desk in Twickenham. We have our 24-hour front desk in Kingston Town Centre. Equidistant between the two is Teddington Police Station, which has been sat empty for years. It is no longer needed. There are also plans in place where that unit could be pressed into service for either affordable housing, for a new doctor's surgery, for many, many things, and would net a capital receipt for the Met, which they desperately need at the moment. The idea of having to sit down, I think there's a disconnect that at the moment, MOPAC doesn't seem to want to talk to people on the ground locally to find out what could happen, what could be moved off the books very quickly, to make the more difficult decisions, to give space for those more difficult decisions. What we do need to have is a bit more flexibility and a bit more oomph behind the estate strategy, because at the moment, what we're risking is just wanting to get it perfect and losing out on potential opportunities, not just for capital receipts, but for those wider societal benefits, such as social housing, such as doctor surgeries, which could go into those units which have stood empty and everybody knows they're not needed.
An approach we've taken in previous years when we haven't had a finalised or published estate strategy is to publish a disposals list, and that's something that we will seek to do as soon as we can.
That will be very helpful, thank you. Just moving on to capital expenditure, if I may, a question for Dan. The 2024-25 capital expenditure budget is forecast to be underspent. How has the Met's record of capital underspending against its capital programme influenced your plans for 25-26?
So much of the capital spend in 25-26 will rely on borrowing. And one of the things that I'd be really loath to do as the statutory CFO is borrow money that's not needed and in effect weaken the balance sheet. And so we have been through the capital plans for 25-26 bottom up, if you'll excuse the phrase, to make sure that I understand why we're spending that money, what it will deliver, and that we've not put into the budget amounts which are too high in order to cover ourselves. So we've done a lot of work to scrub. Sorry, I'm really trying to stay away from accounting terms. We've done a lot of work to make sure that we're comfortable with the capital programme, and that reflects pragmatically what we will deliver. Of course, in the capital programme, things are going to slip, things are going to change, and the numbers will move. But we've done a lot of work, because it's reliant on borrowing rather than revenue funded, to ensure that the capital programme set out in the draft budget is what we intend to spend, subject to budget approval, across the next financial year. You're right that this year we are running an underspend. It's not a huge underspend, but we are running a capital underspend. I'd like to be in the position in the next financial year where what we've set we'll spend is what we'll spend, because that gives me confidence in the plans that we've generated for our capital expenditure. And so, in direct answer to your question, we have done an awful lot of evaluation and analysis of the capital plans for 25-26, and I'm comfortable as statutory CFO that they reflect the Met's financial plans for the next financial year.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Given the time restraints, we did have some questions on savings and efficiencies, but we'll ask for those in writing. So if it's going to be about individual police stations and assets, I think we've got the general point. So is it on estates?
Just on the estate secretary, I just wanted to understand, Deputy Mayor, is it still your understanding that Uxbridge Police Station is saved?
Can I come back to you on that? I need more detail.
Let's move on because we want to get through the last section. I'm going to move to Assemblymember Hall on reserves.
Okay, these are to Dan, please. How will the reliance on limited reserves to fund ongoing expenditure be addressed in the 25-26 budget?
So what we've done in 25-26 is we've protected the level of general reserve. And so, as a rule of thumb, and looking at the guidance from SIPFA, it's for me and for Amana as the MOPAC CFO to make a judgment on the adequacy of those reserves. And I'm comfortable that in the draft budget, the reserves are adequate through the 25-26 financial year. The 25-26 financial year does draw on some of the earmarked reserves for specific purposes, such as New Met for London. But what I want to do in the next financial year is protect the general level of reserve, and then over the medium-term financial plan, what we're currently looking at is how you might rebuild some of those reserves to make sure that the robustness and the resilience is there. But the reason that we've filled the £450 million gap through tough choices and efficiencies is because we can't comfortably go further with our reserves without damaging our medium-term financial resilience.
No, I agree with that. And what do you think the risks with the plans to reduce the reserves balance to 99 million by the end of 27-28? Are you going to?
So we're currently doing a piece of work, as you'd expect, in advance of the spending review on the medium-term financial plan. And so what I'd expect us to, what we will produce, rather than what I'd expect us to produce, is a revised version of the of the medium-term financial plan that looks at the reserve trajectory over the rest of the decade. The published MTFP is within the guidance that SITFA generates on reserves and their adequacy, but I want to do the detailed work 6 months into the role to make sure that we're fully comfortable. I'd expect to see an improvement on the position, given the I talked about recurrent efficiencies before, given the efficiencies that we'll deliver in 25-26. And so I'm comfortable with the published MTFP. I'd like to see an improvement because I'd like the Met to rebuild its financial resilience over the medium term.
Okay, we all want to see efficiencies. It's the cuts that really worry me. Deputy Mayor, do you have any long-term ambitions to build reserves back up to historic levels?
I mean, I think as Dan just outlined, we all understand the importance of having a healthy reserve level, and it's something that, you know, we need to be continually mindful. Obviously, we also don't want to overinflate our reserves, and I know that you can see through the numbers that we've, you know, spent down some of those reserves that were earmarked, because that's important to get that flow through. But it is also really important that we continue to build our base on reserves. And I believe that in the last year alone, we've put some, I think, 20 million aside to build that base back up. So it is something that we're continually trying to get the right level between.
Of
you know, we don't
course.
want to overstack our reserves, but equally, we want to have that financial resilience in case of emergency.
Of course, and we all want that. So tell me, what would you like to see it at? What would you, as Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, what would you like to see the reserves at? What level? What figure?
I mean, I think that, you know, it's important that...
No, just give me a figure. We're really running late on time. Give me a figure that you'd like to aim for. And I'm asking you, Deputy Mayor.
If I could come in, I hold...
I'm just...
I hold the statutory
She's the
responsibility.
Deputy Mayor.
And the fact that she doesn't know is probably failing on my part because I haven't told her.
I doubt it, but...
Our external auditors have advised that an absolute floor for our reserve level is 100 million. I would, on a further side of caution, and I've written in the budget a statement in the budget report, which is published, my personal view, professional view, I should say, is that an absolute minimum is 125 million. So my apologies because I haven't briefed you on that figure.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to welcome Liv Peck, who's the Director of the Violence Reduction Unit, and the next line of questions are on MOPAC and the VRU. So again, continuing with Assembly Member Hall.
Yeah, it's me again. I'm on. What is the impact to MOPAC and the VRU of the 18th of December funding announcement?
There is no real impact. The VRU has a significant funding source for the VRU is the Home Office. The Home Office have announced that the national funding for VRUs is going to remain stable, but they haven't given a London-specific allocation as yet. So we're assuming that it remains static. In terms of the actual police settlement, from memory, there's no direct impact on MOPAC from the specific update in December from the provisional settlement.
So, so there will be no impact of the reduction in MOPAC services funded underneath the government, funded by the government. Not from the provisional announcement that was made in December. There's no change. There is a reduction year on year in the MOPAC budget and the VRU budget. But apologies, your question was specifically about the funding announcement in December. Nothing has changed as a result of that funding announcement in December. Right, thank you. Liv, welcome. You just come in at the very end.
I did, so I come for the last half an hour, so
right.
Here.
No, I saw you in the audience. In his manifesto, Sadiq Khan promised to, I'm quoting, expand my violence reduction unit programme approach with a focus on those areas most affected by violence in London. Do you think that is a pledge achievable under this budget?
Yes, I do. We've had consistent support and growing support from the Mayor since we were set up in 2019. We now receive an annual budget of 19.3 million, and we know that often we've benefited from in-year increases in funding, which has enabled us to support some of the work we discussed last time, which was the robbery fund for 2 years, or indeed actually expand our My Ends programme from 8 neighbourhood schemes now to make sure there's a presence over the 32 boroughs. So yes, I do think that is achievable, and also because the approach is not just reliant on investment through the VRU. It's a lot about the partnership working that we're doing, the joint focus with health and with the police, and thinking about how we can collectively leverage funding to make sure it's reaching the right people.
Although, of course, if we lose 2,300 police and they are a very big partner of yours, will that not make any difference?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, we want to see, increased investment everywhere, don't we? But I think the important point to raise about that is that Sir Mark himself has talked about the police not being responsible for every part of the system in keeping people safe. He can't ensure young people are in school where we know they are safer. He can't be dealing all the time with the increases in mental health cases that he feels he's been called out, or the police officers being called out to. So, there is a key part here about not arresting ourselves out of violence. We can enforce our way out of that. So, prevention is an absolutely key part of it.
Well, I agree with most of that, but I do think that London will see, will be much poorer for the loss of 2,300 officers, without doubt. Liv, why is the VRU seeing proportionately larger reductions in its budget than MOPAC? And how will this affect the delivery of its 5 priority areas?
So we have got a reduction from 44.3 million this year down to 36.8 million, and that is a consequence of 2 things really. One is the consequence of a reduction in some of our project, external grant funding. So we've benefited for the last 3 years from funding, firstly from the Home Office, but in the last 2 years from the Youth Endowment Fund, and that comes in just over £3 million worth, and that's for a programme called Your Choice, which is a London-wide programme. And secondly, because some of the funding that we've had in place has completed. You know, we knew that we had funding for, say, a 3-year project, and that has diminished. And in some cases, of course, what we've tried to make sure is going back to that partnership piece, that where we know programmes are ending, that we're, say, for example, talking to our health partners and seeing if they can pick up some of the costs that we've been incurred.
But if they can't, because budgets everywhere are under pressure, what sort of effect can we expect that to have to Londoners?
Well, obviously, we don't want to see programmes that are having impact at the moment disappear. But we are making sure that we are planning with our partners what the impact of that might be, that we are exploring other alternatives, and that we are looking for additional sources of funding. So I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying it is doable. And an example I would give you is something that we've been investing in for a couple of years now, which is called the IRIS programme, which is training up health professionals to spot the signs of domestic abuse, and then being able and much more equipped to be able to advise the patients they've got in front of them on how to who they should go and talk to, what their kind of pathways are to supporting them. We're reducing that programme next year. The year after that will end. We are talking to the chairs of all of the integrated care boards about how they could integrate some of that training into the training that they do, as part of a kind of normal training programme for those health professionals. So that wouldn't cost as much. It might not be quite as effective, but it's still a way of making sure that those frontline people are managing, I suppose, to support the work we're doing around domestic abuse.
Okay, so given that you're losing millions, what are you most worried about? What are you going to lose that is worrying you the most?
I mean, at the moment, I don't think anything's specifically worrying me, because we've got a planned, we've got a budget that we know how much we've got to reduce the budget by, and we've therefore got, we've cut our costs accordingly, and we are making sure that so we have a balanced budget. Sorry, I was looking for that word. We have a balanced budget for the next 3 years. We've explored how we can make sure, for example, that the My Ends programme that we spoke about in a previous committee can continue to flourish because of the relationships that have been set up over that 3-year period. So there's no one particular aspect of things that concerns me at the moment, but because we've planned it and we've worked with people and we're looking at additional sources of funding. Obviously, we, as Amana has referred to, we are still anticipating our settlement for the Home Office, which is 9.4 million, was 9.4 million this year, and we are hoping is 9.4 million next year. If that doesn't materialise, then obviously we're into a very different series of conversations, because that work is going on at the moment, is being spent on youth workers in custody suites, youth workers in hospitals, some of the expansion of our mentors for kids in pupil referral units, all of which we know is hugely impactful. And that's what I'd be concerned. I actually don't know, Assembly Member Hall. We got a very positive statement on the 18th of December, which talked about the integral role of VRUs in prevention partnerships. We're part of a group working with civil servants on that, which is a key pledge of this government. We are working with them on the implementation of the serious violence duty, which at the moment we get some money for. So what I'm saying is we're in the conversations. They've given us the assurance, I suppose, that violence reduction units are key going forward, but I don't know the actual amount of the settlement. I don't know when we'll know.
I know, I'm just concerned because if Sadiq Khan is saying he's going to expand the violence reduction unit programme approach, and then you've seen millions and millions of pounds less, there must be things that are really important that they're going to have to be given up. If not, what would we be spending all that money on if it wasn't that important? That's my point.
I suppose my point is that we set up as a public health approach, which is very, very looking at what works, and it's thinking about kind of using the evidence we've got and making sure that we're investing in those programmes. And I'll give you one example. One of the things that we've stopped is the Innovation Fund, which was a really good way of enabling small amounts of money, but collectively a bigger pot, to go out to people who had creative ideas. We've stopped that. We're not losing necessarily anything by that. It's a shame because we had some good schemes come forward, but the best ones we've cherry-picked and made sure now they're mainstreamed.
Okay.
We have done very much the same with some of the My Ends programmes. So what we're trying to do is learn from what works and make sure the resources follows that. And my conclusion from that at the moment is that we have got the resources in the right place because we've used the data and because we've spoken to the professionals on the front line and because we've spoken to the young people.
I'm mindful of the time, but perhaps you could write to the committee with the things that you are going to give up, bearing in mind there are so many millions of pounds involved. And it's taxpayers' money, so it'd be good to see what.
Very happy to do that, as I do want to emphasise some of that, and a big chunk of that is also that grant.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Very quickly, Assemblymember Garbutt.
Thanks. It's really helpful to hear, and I'm really positive and supportive of all the work that you're doing. But just, I think you alluded to it then, just the table that we've got shows the outturn from 24-25 to be 30 million, which goes down to 19.3 in 27-28. Are you saying that is it being forecast without the Home Office grant? So you're talking about balancing a budget of a kind of 2-3 million rather than this kind of 11 million drop that we're seeing here?
I'm sorry, I think then the figures you might have got are net and the figures I was referring to as gross. But the budget that you've got in front of you does include the 9.4 from the Home Office over the next 3 years. And what I'm saying to you is we've got a balanced budget insofar as the money we know we've got coming at the moment, which is a decrease. We've worked through that, and as I'm saying to Assemblymember Hall, I think we can do that. But what I'm also putting a slight question mark around is, it's 9.4 going forward, or until we've got the certainty of it. I'm not actually putting a question mark. I'm saying we haven't got the certainty of it yet.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to our panel of guests for attending today and for their answers to our questions. The committee has a few more items of business to deal with, but you are welcome to leave the chamber. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to the chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree outputs arising from this meeting? And can I ask the committee to note the quarterly monitoring reports? Can I ask the committee to note the payments over £250 report? Can we note the committee's work programme and meeting dates?
Oops.
And the next meeting of the committee will be held later here today at 1 p.m. in this chamber. I have no other urgent business for this morning's meeting, and that concludes this meeting.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.